Hello, I'm Carne Ross and this is the World Decrypted, where I try to get behind the coded language of international affairs. First of all, Mali. It's been pretty extraordinary to see France's president take a victory bow in Timbuktu. But at the same time, there's a lot of talk amongst diplomats and officials about what they call a band of instability across Africa, from Somalia in the east all the way to Mauritania in the west. Britain's David Cameron has even, rather extraordinarily, talked about an existential threat coming from what he rather ominously calls the ungoverned spaces of the Sahel. So it seems that Al-Qaeda in the Islamic Maghrebs, or AQIM, their attack in southern Algeria against this gas facility and their assault on Mali itself is part of a much broader terrorist danger. But the reality is, of course, rather more complicated. There is some evidence of collaboration between groups like Nigeria's Boko Haram and Somalia's Al-Shabaab, but what there isn't is any evidence of a coordinated network with international terrorist ambitions. All of these groups are united by a fundamentalist ideology, but each of them stems from very much local origins and have local agendas. Boko Haram in Nigeria, for instance, flows very much from local resentments in the Muslim north about what they see as neglect by the non-Muslim south. Al-Qaeda in the Islamic Maghreb itself, AQIM, started life under a very different name as a group fighting the undemocratic military regime which was supported by the West, above all by France, during Algeria's very brutal civil war. And in Somalia, Al-Shabaab started as an offshoot of the Islamic government that was removed by a US-backed Ethiopian invasion. It's pretty clear that the imminent collapse of Mali required military intervention, but the longer-term solution to stability in the Sahel clearly requires something rather more political and rather more local, and arguably rather more difficult than a military response alone. This is perhaps more difficult for politicians to talk about than the spectre of terrorism in the desert. And now a story you probably haven't heard about, but actually really matters. There's a committee called the Basel Committee, which is a group of the major economies which sets rules for international banking. A couple of years ago, it decided rules on the minimum requirements of capital that banks are supposed to hold against the possibility of collapse. You know, safe capital like cash and other safe assets. 2 weeks ago, extraordinarily and hardly reported in the international press, the Basel Committee suddenly relaxed these standards and allowed banks to use much less safe forms of capital to count against the minimum requirements, including, and this is absolutely extraordinary, assets like mortgage-backed derivatives, which of course were the very things that caused the financial crisis in the first place. I'm afraid it doesn't really take a genius to work out how this happened. The banks lobbied for this change and got what they wanted. The good news is that bank profits will go up, and indeed the day that the news was announced, bank shares all rose.